Okay. All right. Well, it says we're live. So, hey, everybody, if you're watching, and welcome to the debut episode, the premiere edition of the Next Pick podcast. We are part of SP Streamer's 3 podcast. This is our first ever episode. SP Streamer podcast, as you may know, is part of the Fantrax network and the Fantrax family of podcasts. We want to say thank you to them. I am Drew Wheeler at Drew is okay. You can see that right there on Twitter. And with me is my wonderful co-host, Mr. Peyton Skinner. Peyton, how in the world are you, buddy?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here. It's kind of been a long time coming. We've been setting this up for a while, it feels like. And, even before you came along to SP Streamer, Michael and I kind of had something in the works and hoping that we found the right guy. So you came along and here we are, So pretty
I
pumped
hope I
up to get
passed the
after it.
audition.
Yeah, no, man, I can't wait to jump in. I'm, like you said, really thankful to Michael and Fantrax and, just really excited to jump in and, talk about baseball, which we both love, but also even more than that, get to kind of focus on dynasty and prospects, which is kind of up both of our alleys. So really excited to do that.
For sure. You said a lot, man, and that's absolutely all true. Again, thanks to Michael Simeone. We appreciate him so much for the opportunity, and to Fantrax as well. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head, man. This is dynasty and prospects. It's the next pick, so we're focusing on the future. Who is the next pick for your dynasty team in your prospect draft? Who do we like that we're trying to turn you on to? That's kind of the key things, man. So before we get into the meat of the episode, which is, as you can see, guys, it's our top 20 prospects. So Peyton and I have compiled lists of top 20 prospects. Peyton has run them through the aggregator machine, and we have one solid list now that is it's 50% me and 50% him, and we're going to weave them. And, buddy, I know that you've got a lot going on, so what's been going on with you just real quick before we dive into this list?
Yeah, man, it's been a pretty crazy little stretch for my wife and I. We've been actually remodeling a house, so it's been pretty nuts, kind of just trying to do a lot of the work ourselves, just cost friendly. And right now, labor and supply chain, I mean, everything's just nuts right now, the entire market. So as you
Yeah.
can imagine, that drives up costs. But, it was crazy. We'd been looking for a house for a little while, and the market was pretty high for a long time. And we ended up we wanted to be patient and find a good deal. And we ended up finding one we really liked. Location's great. And, like I said, we're really excited. So kind of getting closer to the finish line after a few months here. But we've been dealing with some annoyances with our cabinet delivery, as
I
I've been
was I
talking
was
to you
gonna bring
about.
up the cabinets, the pesky
Yeah.
cabinets.
Yeah, so
So
that's been pretty aggravating. But other than that, we're super excited. Kind of like I said, hopefully in that finishing little stretch. But what about you, man? How's life going?
life is going great, buddy. Thank you so much for asking. Work is going just insane. Traveling to Dallas this weekend. Andy Carlson, I'm coming for you, sucker. So gonna be in Texas. Excited for that. Lots of good food, lots of good folks. Really hyped for that. Been doing some writing at SP Streamer, as you know. Hanging out in our Discord. The SP Streamer Elite membership is a killer thing. Not only do you get access to stuff that you can't really get anywhere else, but you get the Discord, which is some really cool stuff that we've got great members, really knowledgeable. Of course, all the writers are in there. We tell jokes every so often. There's a lot of Seiya Suzuki love, which I'm a big fan of. There's a lot of Creed talk, which I'm a big fan of. So, you also catch some baseball here and there.
Yeah, it's pretty funny you bring up Suzuki. I was going to mention him, even kind of put you on the spot briefly with the new contract.
Let's go.
And I mean, I guess I was going to wait till we were kind of midway in, but let's just go for it now,
Yeah.
honestly. So I'd love to hear kind of your first thoughts. And I mean, if you guys don't know, this guy right here loves some Suzuki. And
Yeah.
if you pop into the Discord, you're likely to see him hyping that player up. So when I saw the news, I was like, okay, I've got to throw this out there when we get live on the podcast. So
Yeah.
let's hear you give him some love and see, do you think it's a good fit? And he's kind of a weird player. He's not necessarily he I guess is technically a prospect eligible player, but he's kind of, it's a weird spot. So I was curious, if he was on this list for you, where would you kind of put him? And is he, obviously he won't be for long, but I was just curious, to give you a
Yeah.
chance to hype him up, talk about him, and share some of your thoughts. You put together a lot of research, a really good article. So
Thanks, man.
go for
Appreciate
it. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the kind words about the article, buddy. I really appreciate it. That was really a passion piece for me. And I'm hoping to get some more of those kind of out there. And I see the comments over here, guys. Not ignoring you at the moment. I'm going to bring this up actually to Peyton here in a second. Got a really good question about some first-year player draft stuff, dude, that we may want to just kind of briefly jump on before we get into the top 20. Since we're talking Suzuki. But Seiya Suzuki, if you don't know, he has got plate discipline out the wazoo, an amazing contact skill, great power. He keeps pitchers honest and catchers honest on the base paths, so he's going to steal bases. And in terms of his signing to Chicago, I literally couldn't be more excited. I think that the $85 million committed to him shows that the Cubs are planting a flag with Suzuki that I think a player of his ilk absolutely deserves and warrants. All of the hype and all of the buying that I was doing on Suzuki before, and I actually so player shares has been a big thing on Twitter today. I discerned that Suzuki is my highest invested player this year. Go figure. I think I have him in like 80% of my leagues.
No, you're kidding.
No, I'm being yeah. This is a huge surprise, but I'm investing even more now. I think that in Chicago, that's a great ballpark. They've shown that he's the guy. I dig it entirely. So I'm gonna see if I can So y'all, this is fresh, and Peyton, I hate to throw this at you, man, but so check this out. Baldy No Cap, what's up? Appreciate the shout out. Says, where would you draft Suzuki among the FYPD guys like Meyer, Watson, Davis, Lawler, and company? It's funny you mentioned those because really the guys I would consider at his level in terms of FYPD right now would be Meyer and Watson. And even still, I've advised guys in our Discord to take him number one. I really, truly believe in Suzuki 100%, matter of fact. So do you have anything on that, buddy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious if you're in a win now type of, window. I think it's very clear Suzuki, you can make every argument that he's the top guy. I really do. I think he is going to be, I think, there's a lot of expectation and people compare him to Kim last year, but I don't think that's really fair. And, they came from very different leagues. They're very different players,
Absolutely.
So I think that it's kind of quick to judge him if you're putting that comp. And honestly, I still think Kim's a lot better than what we saw last year. So comparing him to 2021 Kim is like the lowest you can do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I totally agree with you. I think a lot of the names that are mentioned here, and then depending on the format, I'm actually a pretty big fan of Brady House as well. I think,
yes.
The power, a lot of the, just big term, the tools that you see with him, he's built like a house. Like people say it all the time, but it's an easy go-to because he really is, man. I think especially in, head-to-head points or anything that is kind of focusing on just bulk stats, getting extra bases, total bases, slugging, all of those things. He kind of sneaks into that tier as well for me.
That's a great shout, honestly. Without his name being here in the comment we received, I definitely spaced on Brady House. But yeah, honestly, if my head's in the lion's cage, so to say, I'd probably say Meyer, House, Watson, Suzuki, and then the order in which I would take them, as Peyton alluded, would be kind of dependent on your team. So anyway, tell me, buddy, Peyton, you've run our top 20. I took mine. You took yours. You've run them into the aggregator machine, and the results it's produced. How do you feel about that?
It was pretty cool. I think it was funny. We had a little bit of a discussion, prior to jumping on earlier this morning. And, I think we have a lot of similar guys in the way that we view players. And, especially kind of the top tier guys, we may, have little discrepancies. But after you get kind of past the late teens and start getting into the 20s, it starts getting, really big gaps to where there's a guy you may love and I have him, down in the 40s or even, sometimes in the 50s and vice versa for you. So I thought that was pretty cool seeing those types of players. I'm really excited to jump in and, start talking about some guys.
Likewise. Hey, let's wait no further, man. Let's jump right in. Why don't you tell the folks who our top five are, our aggregate top five? We can talk about any discrepancies, like you said, between the two lists. And I know that we've both got some notes for one another, and let's dive right in.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so kind of like you said, our top five, we have Julio Rodriguez, and then we actually have a three-way tie for number 2. I don't know if you saw that, Drew, but we have Bobby Witt Jr., Spencer Torkelson, and Grayson Rodriguez that all came out tied for that second slot. So that'll be pretty interesting there. And then rounding out the top 5, we have Riley Green. So pretty solid top 5 there.
Yeah, I think so. I want to say that the main discrepancy we would have as to the consensus, I guess, across the industry, that's bizarre. I hate saying the industry. The fantasy community, I think, is Rodriguez in, Adley out. And I realize we'll get to it that G-Rod being in our top 5 and tied for number 2, as you alluded to, is kind of on my shoulders again. He is my number 2 overall prospect right now. And so we've actually got some notes about that as well. I think I saw in the notes you had a question about G-Rod specifically, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I noticed kind of, and you guys will see as we reveal a lot of our lists, but I noted similarly that you were pretty high on a lot of arms. And I was just curious, kind of over the course of the past couple of years, what we've seen happen to the, not just any top guys, but the top guys. Think about Forrest Whitley. People were saying, oh, absolute can't miss. And then, Mackenzie Gore, same thing, absolute can't miss, number 1. Grayson Rodriguez is kind of getting similar praise. I think he's built differently than those guys, and there's a lot of things that he checks the box that some of those didn't. But in general, I just wanted to hear your thoughts a little bit. What makes you so comfortable kind of having pitchers so highly ranked in some of your, throughout your list, really, but especially in G-Rod's case, all the way up at number 2, as you alluded to, not many analysts are confident enough to throw him that high.
Yeah. We've got, as well as in the comments here, we're seeing the same thing coming up, and you're saying exactly what they are. I think if I had to put that thought or that theory of mine into words, it is that pitchers of that ilk, that I trust the command, I trust the stuff, I believe in the pitches, and the mix is so strong, or has the potential to be so strong. I think that they're just as valuable because they are so rare, because they are unicorns in a certain regard. I trust them, and I feel like they're worth investing in. Because batters, I feel like I like so many batters. The pitchers that I like and really truly believe in, I want to invest in them because I know that the pitchers further down I don't believe in quite as much as the ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of taking into effect how few the crop is there, and you're trying to take advantage, I guess.
Right, exactly.
So,
you touched on another thing that I'd like to just kind of speak to quickly. The things that have happened in the past with Whitley is a great example, and then Gore. These are two guys who I still believe in. I think they definitely have their hiccups. I think they definitely have issues that are needing to be ironed out. But I think that obviously every situation, every player is unique. Every prospect's growth is not linear. I'll say that 700 million times through our episodes, and I know you believe the same thing. I don't know. The combination of all of G Rod's very special talents together, it was undeniable. And I know that you and I have said that Julio Rodriguez is pretty universally our top prospect without much argument. The only prospect I gave any other consideration for number one was Grayson Rodriguez, and I do advocate for him as totally as I possibly could.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good transition. Or do you have a question for me real quick here?
Well, no, not necessarily. I was going, I guess, to ask about how you had Rodriguez in your top five. What would be your hesitation, I guess, to not go higher?
Yeah, I think kind of similarly, I had him in my top five despite what I've seen with pitchers, just because of same thing you were talking about. I think he stands out amongst the rest of the group. And if you look at my list, there's him, there's Shane, and then there's a pretty decent drop. And I don't have a lot of arms within my top list of prospects. So similar to you, I think those arms that I do feel pretty confident in, I want to boost up and I want to have them in a place where I think, hey, if I was in a position to where I could take this guy versus another hitter, I probably would go for this arm just because, like you said, there's so many hitters that are, I may prefer a hitter straight up over another hitter, but there are a lot of them that are in that same tier to me, you know. So that's kind of my thought process there. And, G-Rod is very unique where he checks almost every box that you want him to check. And I think that he's just really one of those arms that you dream about when you're thinking about a pitching prospect. And, the typical guy that there's not much reliever risk. There you see a lot of command issues with people that typically have that level of stuff, but his command is pretty solid. And, kind of every level so far, he's been pretty dominant. I think the biggest thing too is for me, I really want a pitcher to be at AA for me to feel pretty confident about them. And, he really didn't have much trouble in AA when he first had his testing there. So I think that made me a lot more confident. This time last year, he wasn't nearly as high, but after seeing the way he did against that AA competition, it, justified me enough to boost him up into that tier.
That's a great answer, really. I think you. I like the way that you're being that you're kind of discerning. You want to see them prove it, and I definitely am with you on that. And I think that maybe my rankings are a bit too cavalier in that regard, because I know that further down the list and kind of coming up later on, we'll talk about Mick Abel, who I am a huge fan of. I know he gets a lot of helium, and he's a guy that's shown not only he hasn't made it to AA yet. He's still very extremely young, and his command is still growing. He's growing into his command. So we'll get to that later. But I love the points you made. I wanted to call that out and excite you guys for later when we talk about this again. This kind of expand on this point. But I had a question for you, buddy. So listen tight. You in your top five, I had my notes here. Let me pull up my notes. You had Bobby Witt Jr. ranked over Spencer Torkelson, which is in contrast to myself. I had Torque over Witt. My question is it a matter of Bobby Witt's stolen base potential, or is Torkelson's bat-only profile a point of hesitation where you say, if the bat falters, if the pitching's too much for him, Witt has other avenues to succeed?
Yeah, I think it's more the first point you made. I think that, to be honest, I'm not really worried about Torque's bat faltering at all. So I totally understand, people putting him highly ranked in, such as yourself. I think that Witt just overall, the upside is, he's the biggest upside guy in terms of, just overall floor versus upside together. I think I personally, and you are the same way, prefer J-Rod because of the overall consistency, control with the bat. I think he has more power. I think especially in OBP leagues, which is kind of what we were gearing towards here, thought process wise. He kind of gives that edge to me. But I thought it was interesting that you even posed the question to me, honestly, because I think a lot of people would make the argument that Witt and J-Rod are kind of tier 1, and you would be the anomaly with Torkelson kind of up there. So I'm gonna turn it back on you and ask you kind of what's your thought process there, having Torkelson so high.
Hit tool. I think that Torkelson's hit tool is immaculate. I don't trust Witt's as much. I think Witt will probably – the chances of them both being successful major leaguers, I think, is about equal because, kind of as I alluded to, Witt has more opportunities to succeed, but I believe so much in Torkelson's contact and in his power that he will, level the gap, so to say. Torkelson has – and, I'm going to say makeup. He has so much makeup to him and like his character and his like off the field stuff and kind of the interior, like, the mental and stuff. It's wonderful. And that's not to discredit Bobby Witt because he's, tremendous in those regards as well. When I look at somebody's hit tool that is Torkelson-esque, it gets me excited. And I don't trust Witt's as much as I trust Torques. Now, that being said, admittedly, I am lower on Witt than many because you kind of put it out there in a really cool way. Like those are tier 1. Torque is probably tier 2, 3 maybe, but in my mind, I'd say they're on the same tier, which is the very next tier below the best batter and pitcher. So, just my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I think
there was
that.
I'm sorry, man. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think that it's, just interesting seeing someone taking, to your point, a guy that doesn't really have much other than the bat. So it just speaks so highly to his ability to hit that we both have him number 3. You obviously have him, you have Witt below him only because you had G-Rod up there, but we actually both viewed Torque at the same rank. So that was pretty interesting there.
That is pretty cool. So those three, if I'm not mistaken, were our second place tie, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's because, Torque was even, and then, 2 and 4 were the flip for each of us on Witt and Grayson.
Great minds, buddy. Great minds. Math. Hashtag math. So let's see. Let's go down. Can you hit me with our next 5? So this would be 6 through 10 for you guys doing your cheat sheets at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next 5, we have Corbin Carroll, Adley Rutschman, CJ Abrams, Shane Baz, and Anthony Volpe.
That's a good list.
Yeah, that's pretty killer.
That's a really good list.
A lot of these guys I'm pretty high on, and I think it's pretty cool seeing a lot of these guys, burst on the scene, so to speak, where that top tier were guys, this time last year, we were pretty familiar with a lot of them, and, you knew who they were, and some of these other ones, it's really diving up the ranks in a big way this year. So that's pretty exciting seeing names like that.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Let me ask you something. So when I was, this is funny, you'll hear me say this probably a million times too, and we talked about it off the air, putting your name, so saying Peyton Skinner says, this guy is better than this guy. Like that opens you up to so much scrutiny, but at the same time, it's kind of freeing. I feel so free being able to say, you know what, I'm a human. This is my personal opinion. Take it as you will. In doing this process, I found that Corbin Carroll and CJ Abrams are so incredibly similar. And I'm curious, of the two, do you have a preference? Is there one that you'd be rushing to get before the other, and why?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I like both of these guys, but if you look at the rankings, you probably can see that I'm actually a little bit lower on Abrams than a lot of people are. Not because I don't like him. I just am kind of what I mentioned before. And, even looking at the comments here, we saw someone asking about proximity factoring into our rankings. And, I'll touch on that a little bit. I think for myself, it absolutely does. I really do think, kind of what I said before about pitching, that AA point is a really big cutoff for me when it comes to prospect evaluation. And I think a lot of orgs, when you're inside the organizational level, that's the same thing that they're looking at is up to that point, you're really looking at raw tools, kind of, what is this guy's max EV? What is, the raw stats? You think about, why people were drooling about Jason Dominguez before he debuted. And those are the types of things that a lot of organizations are looking for kind of early on in a professional career. They don't really care what your batting average is. They don't really care, how many home runs, how many stolen bases. All the fantasy stats don't really matter.
Yeah.
To be honest, they're looking more at the, skill level, positional, trying to look into, okay, does this guy play? Does he fit it short? Is he going to need to move to third? And I think in the fantasy realm, a lot of times we don't think about those things because we only care about the stats that give us fantasy points and fantasy value, so it's pretty funny to think about it that way. But I think to go back to the Carroll versus Abrams and kind of why I went down that real rabbit hole there is what we saw from Carroll last season was really eye-opening to me. I've been a huge Carroll fan for a long time, and I was a big believer that the power was going to come. And I know it was a really small sample size, but when we saw it, I was super excited, and I think I've kind of fully bought in. And this is the type of guy that I really expect could be every year first rounder if that power sticks, which is pretty high praise. And I don't think that Abrams is far off from that. But if you look at Abrams, he just hasn't bulked up in the way that a lot of people have projected. And I know he's still really young, and I know there's still a lot of time for him to do that. But I think Carroll's at a position where we're kind of already starting to see some tangible things checking boxes per se. And with Abrams, the hit tool and speed are obviously there, and they're plus, like elite off the charts. But in terms of the other categories, he's likely not going to give you a lot of home runs as is. So it's going to take, a Trey Turner type of power adding, which happens. There's plenty of guys who late in their career, Trey Turner, Jose Ramirez, there's a bunch of guys like that. And I think that, it's totally possible, but it's much less probable, if that makes sense.
100%, man. I'm with you. I think that the bulk, the beefiness, it needs to come for Abrams to really develop. And that's not to say that we don't recommend him. I mean, clearly he's in our top 10 aggregate. I think that he's a special player, obvious table setter type guy, threat to hurt you in all these different ways in terms of his skills. But I'm with you on Corbin Carroll. Big fan of Corbin Carroll. Let's see if there's any other notes. And if not, then I guess we could proceed to our next 10, give a little bit of thoughts there. Our next 5.
Yeah, I don't know if any of these guys, for you kind of jump off. I know Rutschman was a guy that a lot of people have really highly. Was there a specific reason for you personally? I know it's funny, we both actually had him at 8, so we had him at the same spot. But as we mentioned, a lot of lists have him in that top tier. So I wanted to ask you kind of your thought process and see if it was the same as mine, because it probably is, but we'll see.
Okay, let's give it a shot. Well, in terms of Adley, I think that, again, all the tools are there. And this is so tricky because I keep wanting to go to this mindset that I have of at catcher, these tools are, supernatural in a way. Like the fact that he has the hit tool, the power tool, that he fields a very critical position well, or well enough. And, he's not a dud in any one aspect of the game. It makes me want to say, I should push this guy up. But in terms of, I guess it's apples and oranges with, like, let's say J-Rod versus Adley. Some people can say, the fact that Adley's a catcher and, apples here are far more plentiful, throw that away. We take the one good orange because there's 7 good apples. I think that it's easier for me to say Julio or Torque is better just because the skills are just that much more trustworthy. I trust them that much more, and really that kind of wins the day for me in this premier set of rankings, so to say. Again, not an indictment against Adley because I target him when possible. It seems that in redraft settings, and this is a good question for you as well. In redraft settings, I haven't gotten Adley like at all, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think I have any Adley, but it's not that I'm not trying because people are drafting him as a C1 in a lot of 15 team leagues. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was actually on the SP Streamer, Michael and Lauren's podcast a little bit ago, and we talked about Adley, and it's pretty funny. I actually like Adley in redraft. I think that he's a great target. I think that he's going kind of a lot later than Ruiz and others who are kind of in a similar ballpark to him. And it's kind of funny, actually, hearing you talk about him. I would say that we are pretty different on our reasoning of where we have him ranked.
Okay.
Because from a skill set perspective, I'll say, honestly, I think that Adley is just as good as the Torkelsons and the Riley Greens and that tier of level, that top level of guys for me personally. I love everything about him. I think, especially in OBP leagues, he's going to put together incredible at-bats, and he's really going to, I think there's a very good chance that the minute he debuts, he's going to be the best fantasy catcher from that moment on, which is I don't know if that's a bold take or not, but I really do believe that because he's just that special with the bat. And I think that for me, the reasoning that he's lower is strictly because he plays catcher, and I don't think he's going to get the volume that those other guys get. And I've talked about this before, but I'm that guy that kind of pushes catchers in all my drafts. I just refuse to pay up for a position if I don't need to.
Right.
And, they're not going to give me the same amount of at-bats. They're not, even if the skill level is the same, unfortunately, Adley's not going to have the same amount of plate appearances as J-Rod or Spencer Torkelson, and that hurts him, I think. So it is unfortunate, but I really do think that he is a really great hitter. And I think that there's really nothing, when I look at his profile, there's nothing for me personally that makes him deserving to be below that tier of guys when you just look at what he does in the batter's box.
You said it. Hey, and like we talked about earlier today, I feel like the discussion and the back and forth is going to it almost compels me to adjust my rankings. So like after this, if I've adjusted my rankings and you see Adley bump up a little bit, I don't want you to be surprised, Peyton. I'm just going to pre-warn you on that because I want to say that you have sold me a little more on Adley. And I feel like I was pretty in on Adley to begin with, but you may have done a little bit more shifting and working on it. So real quickly, Anthony Volpe, Dynamite. I love it. That's kind of just all I wanted to say. He's a great player.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying because he's that guy that I want to put higher in my rankings. Like every time I go to update my rankings, I feel like I circle his name and I'm like, all right, I got to find a way to move him up. And he's just like stuck. He's in my top 10, which I know he needed to be, but I'm like, okay, I just can't quite. There's all these other guys that check, they have a little bit more across the board, whether it's power, speed, there's other tools that are a little bit higher to where I can't quite give him a bump over some of those guys. But I love everything about him, absolutely. And, obviously he's the biggest riser for almost every prospect board. from
Yeah.
last season, you know?
It seems universal, and I think it's for good reason. He definitely is not the same kid in his, after he was drafted. It's not him. This is a brand new animal, and it's a good one. So Yankees fans are blessed in that regard. Tell you what, man, why don't we hit that next five? Let's see who ranks number 11 through 15 on our list.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next tier here, we have O'Neal Cruz, followed by Josh Young, Francisco Alvarez, George Kirby, and Noel V Marte.
Interesting.
I think this is where we start, kind of different thing. There's a couple
Yeah.
names that I was pretty high on, and then there's a
Yeah.
couple names that you were pretty high on. And so this is where, I think it'll be pretty interesting conversation here, talking about some of these guys.
Those of you that have been watching, you've made it to the good part of the podcast. Those of you that have been listening, you've made it to the good part of the podcast. So let's have it. I'm going to just throw it out there. Noel V Marte. I don't trust him. There's something in his profile. Everybody starts turning off the podcast right now. This guy, what does he think? There's something in his profile, and it is the hit tool that it gives me a weird vibe. I don't know. I don't know what it is, Peyton. So I'm gonna let you put the convincer hat on again and see what you can do for Noel V Marte before we dive into these other four, because this is a heavy group, man. Lots of great talent here. And again, like you said, some differentiation. So real quick, Noel V Marte, if you want to sing this guy's praises, or if you want to agree and we can be pariahs together, let's.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I'm actually not a huge Marte guy either, but I am higher on him than you are. And so it was kind of funny when I was putting together my list, almost everyone has him kind of fringe top 10.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's a ton of upside. He has kind of, in terms of raw tools, there's more than enough to justify including him in that tier with the Volpe, Abrams, those other shortstops in that same group. And I see a lot of rankings that kind of have that trio kind of clustered together almost. Yeah. And, it may vary, on what guy prefers which one. But for me, I just think they're kind of what you touched on. I don't think there's quite as much safety with Marte. And while the ceiling is pretty high and pretty substantial, I'm just not quite as sure about that hit tool. Yeah. Same thing as what you were talking about. I think that, he's going to be, there's the potential there for him to be an elite, power source, especially if he does stick at shortstop. But there's multiple things where, he's young, already a pretty massive guy for that age.
Yeah.
Plenty of reason to think he might not stick at shortstop long term. If he moves to third, then, you really need the bat to be there. But I think it's still way too early to be out on the guy.
Yeah.
I'm just not fully like, okay, this guy's a surefire top 10 at this point.
I think I'm comfortably with you there. Looking at the ranks, and correct me if I'm wrong here, buddy, but you have got Marte at 15. I have Marte at 20. I know at certain points in the production of my list, I had Marte at 25. I want to say I toyed with going lower, but the allure of a shortstop with that sort of power and with those skills kind of, across the board in a really nice way, it pushed me and compelled me to raise him begrudgingly to 20. I say that jokingly, of course. He it's like you said, it's way too early to give up on a guy that's this talented and this young. Anyhow, I did want to bring up another player to you, and that is Francisco Alvarez. This is the first player, I believe, on the list where the discrepancy is opposite of the way that it's been, where I'm the high guy and you are a little lower. And it's not a terrible discrepancy. It's 7 picks. I have him at 13. You have him at 20. Do you want to speak to Francisco Alvarez, and why the discrepancy may be there for you.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I actually love Alvarez, and I am a huge fan of everything I've seen about him. It's just, again, kind of giving him a knock because he's a catcher. And I think that, he's so far away right now. And it's kind of funny. I just saw the comments, and I'm literally about to say that exact same type of thing. But for me, I just couldn't put him that close to Adley personally, to where I just think Adley is so much more proven. He's so much
Sure.
closer to being he is MLB ready. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, he very likely should be Baltimore's catcher on opening day. Like, there's absolutely no reason he shouldn't be, other than if they're trying to
Injury.
manipulate service time or something.
Well, we know he's injured currently, but yes, I mean that in a perfect world, you're absolutely right. Please
Yeah, of
continue. I'm
course.
sorry.
From a skill, no, you're totally fine. Yeah, I'm talking strictly skills. From a skill set standpoint. But like I said, I love Alvarez. I think that there's a ton of things and reasons to be excited about the guy. I just personally, if I'm gonna bump Adley and penalize him for being a catcher, and I love his bat as much as I do, and he's that close to MLB ready, then it's kind of hard for me to justify putting a guy that's a teenage catching prospect who, albeit did post ridiculous numbers this year, but he's still pretty far away. There's a lot of risk and volatility there. So that was kind of my biggest reasoning on putting him down where he is at.
I get that completely, and all those are things that you have to bake into your thought process. I see that bat as being, um, I'm going to invent an adjective here, Piazza-esque. It's so much power. I think that the Mets have got something truly special with Alvarez and that power that his bat has. Without looking right now at my grades or thoughts, which is we've kind of I'm flying off the cuff here in a way. I want to say that the power I have marked higher for Alvarez. And again, at catcher, I think that that's just doubly more valuable because it is such a low bar to clear. But again, maybe this is something that upon further reflection, we adjust, because you made a great point. Adley is the package. He's ready to go. And this uh, teenager who's playing and playing well, but is still a ways away. I do think that there has to be some kind of reflection there, and that's a great point, and I appreciate you illustrating it in such an astute way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we, move forward here, I wanted to ask you, is there anything, obviously Josh Young just, we got the news. Unfortunately, he was kind of set up, a lot of people thought, to be the third baseman for the Rangers coming into the season and kind of hopefully run away with that role. Did you kind of give him any kind of hit because of this injury, or did he not really move at all for you?
Young was in my top 10 until my most recent adjustment. And yes, the proximity there did feel like it was meaningful enough to make an adjustment in that regard. So, you bump him down, and at this point, I have him at 12, and I think that feels okay. Again, you want to, like I've said several times, we're going to make adjustments to this. I know I am. So, another great comment there as well. Young is dealing with injuries almost, on a year-to-year basis, so there is some concern there. But again, the bat, the makeup, the profile there says that a third base, it feels like a third baseman to target to me, and I have when available. I think that he's still a very talented player, and the Rangers, it appears, were setting him up to succeed as far as eliminating his competition at third base, or limiting it, I guess, in a more realistic sense. So I guess that would be my answer for you, sir.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think this kind of ties back to something I was saying hinting at earlier, but I didn't say it verbatim. But, you were talking about, how do I put this guy above this guy? And, when it comes to prospects for me, and this is just kind of the way I evaluate guys, is I really don't care that much about, oh, he's 12 and he's 13. For me, what I love to do is kind of have tiers. And so for me, there's right now, I just have a tier of two in tier one, and that's J Rod and Bobby Witt personally for me. And then, there's tier two, which is kind of the next guys running, I would say probably to like 12 ish is where I have that next tier. There's like a mini tier of like 3 to 6, 3 to 7.
Okay.
But either way, I think my point here is I really think that it's more important to kind of see where this guy fits in terms of tier and grouping. And, Young is one of those where I had him in my kind of bigger second tier, not that mini elite tier that I was talking about. But with this news, I kind of bumped him right below that, kind of in that 15 to 30 tier ish, something like that, 15 to
Okay.
35. And as I go down in my rankings, my tiers get bigger and bigger, as you would expect.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. He went from the kind of bottom of one tier to the top of another tier. So it doesn't look like a huge shift for me in just, nominal rankings in terms of numeric value. But I did think it was important to bring up the point that, like they mentioned in the comments, this is kind of the second time something like this has happened. And he's not a huge upside prospect to begin with. I think,
Right.
what people are really drawn to here is the floor and the potential for pretty good counting stats and good volume. And if you have a guy that's injured a lot, then you're not really getting that counting stat and volume edge that you thought you were. So that kind of gives him a little bit of a hit for me personally,
That's a
if
great
I'm
point.
nitpicking.
Well, sure. I mean, and that's what we're here for. We're here to nitpick these guys that are all, exorbitantly talented, prospects that are held in high regard by the teams as well as their fantasy managers. I think we're here to nitpick, and you make a great point. I think that within your, is it fair to call it criticism? Are you okay with it being called criticism?
Yeah, absolutely.
In your criticism, I think I plucked a nugget of something about myself. The floor is so appealing to me, the high floor. I think that even if the ceiling is, only marginally above it, I think the floor gives me comfort. And again, I guess that's kind of reflected with other rankings. I trust the guys that hit. I trust the guys with command. I trust that they can do what they're going to do or supposed to do at the bare minimum. So that's a great point, man. I like that a lot. So we spoke about Young. We spoke about Alvarez. Is there anyone? Let's see. Is there anyone else in this tier you want to touch on before we move to the next five? To round out the top 20.
I mean, I don't know if you want to. I could talk about O'Neal Cruz. I've been fascinated by this guy for years. Like, he's been probably one of my more intriguing prospects for quite some time, and he's
He's
just a really
supremely
perplexing
interesting.
guy. Yeah. So I don't think there's a lot I need to say about him because I think everyone's kind of aware of what he is. But I just think that he's a really fun player. So I wanted to give him a quick shout out.
So, speaking real quickly on George Kirby, while we're talking about this, I was asked in the comments here, or we were asked about how hitters hold their value compared to pitchers, because pitchers seems like they plummet a lot quicker in terms of rankings compared to hitters, and I think that that's fair. Pitchers are a lot easier to judge because they have less opportunity. I think, first of all, I mean, a pitcher starts every 5 games theoretically, whereas a hitter should perform every day, every other day, at least in the minor leagues. And so, to that point, I think it's all just, in my opinion, a matter of trust, as it's been through my list. As you've heard me say, I trust this player's skills to stand up to the greater sample size of another. And that, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I generally agree with you. I think that a lot of pitchers for, whether it's fair or not, I agree with the comment. He totally hit it on the head. Like, we as an industry and as a fantasy community tend to penalize pitchers much quicker, and I can even see it in my own rankings, and we haven't gotten to him. This might be kind of a good transition in the next tier. Sure. But Marco Luciano is a guy who, I absolutely love. Like, you'll see where I have him in our next tier. And I did not phase at all from last year. And on the other side, Mackenzie Gore is a guy that is nowhere to be seen on this list for either of us, And so I think that speaks a lot to, the comment here. And I think that, it's a hard time being a pitcher because unlike the position side of things, when you're a pitcher, anytime you start to struggle, you get that reliever risk tag. You never want that. But right when there's struggles with command, with durability, with, he only has 2 pitches, everyone wants to start, especially in fantasy. He's a reliever. He's not going to be an ace. There's no ace upside. And, from there, it's easy to start decking those guys down. And I think that speaks a lot to why, we don't have a lot of pitchers in general ranked so highly, just because of the volatility in general of the position.
Sure. I love that point. The volatility, it does create more hesitation. And so again, this is the buzzword of the day, guys. Trust. The ones you can trust, the ones that you see display those traits that are trustworthy. Command, of course, stuff, another one. Everybody has bad outings. And it's like you said, one bad outing turns into reliever risk. One bad inning even can turn into bust. Because you raised a great point. Luciano, who, for all intents and purposes, I want to love. I want Luciano higher in my rankings because I love the skills, but it scares me. So I guess in some regard, I'm holding them, I don't want to say equally accountable, because like you said, Gore's not anywhere sniffing my top 40. I made 40, a list of 40. He, wasn't even considered at that point. So maybe that's a great point, man. Maybe it should be held more equally. Who knows? So you were saying about the next 5, brother. What do we got?
Yeah, let's make that transition here. So we have 16 through 20. We got Hunter Green, Marco Luciano, Tristan Casas, Alec Thomas, and Jordan Walker.
There's a lot of, even just hearing that list, there's a lot of differentiation between us here. So go ahead, brother. Who do you want to talk about?
This is, the last tier we started to differentiate, but almost every one of these guys, it was like, okay, you had this guy like top 10, and he was like in my 30s, and then vice versa. So there's like, 2 or 3 guys that I absolutely love, and then, 2 or 3 guys that you absolutely love. And it seemed like so I'm really curious to hear, why was it that way,
Likewise. So I referenced earlier when we were speaking, I know the guy that I would say is the big Peyton guy, and the guy that I think is the big Drew guy here of this 5. And so I'm gonna be a selfish boy and jump in first. I'm gonna ask Jordan Walker. If I'm not mistaken, and you have to correct me here, I think I had Jordan Walker ranked 40th overall. Before the aggregator machine crunched these into usable numbers that were more fair to the both of us and produced a more cohesive ranking, Walker was ranked so low because I don't trust that the hit tool will completely come around. Now, that being said, you, sir, Mr. Skinner, in your rankings, you have Jordan Walker ranked where?
I believe I had him at 14.
Uh-huh.
Yep, 14.
So, let's talk about Jordan Walker.
Yeah, let's talk about Walker. It's honestly similar to the same amount of love I have for Francisco Alvarez, who we were just talking about.
Sure.
But I think that the upside is even higher, and he doesn't play catcher. So he immediately gets two kind of mini bumps because of that. But kind of everything I saw about Walker, I was just in love with. I didn't really see any reason to think that this guy didn't deserve to be in my elite tier of prospects. And so I decided that he should be.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that he did, I think, he put together strong plate appearances. The K to walk ratio was solid. Kind of across the board, there was really nothing that was alarming to me necessarily and made me even give even a slight pause. I know he was at A ball, so again, going back to my rule, he didn't get to double A, and he, was only 19 years old though. So when you think about the age gap, when you're thinking about, where he was versus the average age, it's even more impressive when you look at guys like himself, like Alvarez, those types of guys that are teenagers and they made it all the way to high A like those guys did. And, he struggled a little bit once he got to high A. The strikeout numbers were a little bit high. The walk rate dipped a little bit. So that's probably kind of someone like you, that's probably your jumping point of, oh, that's where I'm, curious about the hit tool. But if you look at the WRC plus, it was still 124. So he was still doing damage with the bat. He hit 8 home runs. I think in general, the overall, the product of the full season was enough for me to be pretty excited about him. And I think, we'll see what he does next year. I think next year, this is one of those guys that I may be a little bit out in front, or I'm, this time next year, people like you will be pointing at me like, oh, look at you, you're an idiot. What were you thinking?
I don't think that's going to be the case, because even the more that I've looked into Walker since I knew that the question would be posed to me, I think that I'm too harsh, because the skills are incredible. This is a guy that I think could absolutely be a 30+ homer bat, is very, very talented. And I think I am being too critical, because guys that I have ranked highly, like Mick Abel, or even Francisco Alvarez, as you were alluding to, I think that Walker is of a similar build, and so to give them trust and not him speaks ill to me and to my list. So officially, I can say Walker will be moving up the list. So one more time, real briefly, can we get the top 20 list in recap, please, sir?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we had Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr., Spencer Torkelson, Grayson Rodriguez, Riley Green, Corbin Carroll, Adley Rutschman, C.J. Abrams, Shane Baz, and Anthony Volpe, rounding out our top 10 there.
Very nice.
Then we have O'Neal Cruz, Josh Young, Francisco Alvarez, George Kirby, Noel V Marte, Hunter Green, Marco Luciano, Tristan Casas, Alec Thomas, and Jordan Walker.
That's a great top 20. I will say that I think going forward, of course, being the debut episode of the podcast, I think we'll have to revisit these rankings, especially because I've talked about wanting to adjust them just based upon what we've gathered and learned so far, and what we're learning from one another, what we're learning from these kinds of conversations, what I'm learning at least. So I think we'll have to come back to this in a future episode, readjusting and seeing, especially after the season kicks off, which is very soon, kind of adjusting and seeing what's what, so to say, what's really what.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I think, this will be something that, like you mentioned, we're going to be continually updating our list. It's going to be an ongoing process, and, it's always going to be a fluid list. At any given moment, some news could drop and we could immediately, bump a guy up or bump a guy down based on something that we hear, so
for sure,
it's always one of those things. And it's that way already at the MLB level, right? But it's that way, to the nth degree you're looking at prospects. And the further down that prospect spectrum, the younger they are, and the lower level that they've played, that volatility just increases exponentially. So it gets harder and harder to really feel confident, like, oh yeah, this guy's easily going to be top 10 2 years from now, and he's 50 right now. So those types of things are pretty hard to predict.
Absolutely. You make a great point. I can already tell you, man, I'm going to learn so much from hearing you and your perspective on prospects and on dynasty ball going forward. I want to thank you again, man, for everything you've done, for running the aggregator machine and getting this put together for us. Tell the fine folks at home, Mr. Skinner, where they can find you over the interwebs and in our spare time between episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of what Drew did. I'm Peyton Skinner 12, and you can find me on Twitter. As Drew mentioned, I think our Discord chat is a really great place to be. I know plenty of you guys are members of SB Streamer, but I would highly recommend it. There's so many times that even I like to just read and evaluate where kind of just common fantasy community views players. Yeah. And even if you're not posting, I like to just read and see, okay, it seems like generally people are pretty high on this guy, and I'm not quite as high. So if I have that guy in leagues, that might be a time where I can say, hey, I might should try and shop this guy around.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a great place. Especially this time of year as we're getting ready for season, it gets busier and busier. Today there was multiple times where I'd set my phone down and I'd come back and, we had just, it was just filled up with messages. I'm like, all right, well, you can tell it's getting close to season. So it's pretty exciting. I definitely love being a part of it, but highly recommend it to any of you guys that aren't there.
Agreed. 100%. The SP Streamer Elite membership, you got to look it up on the website, spstreamer.com. You get all kinds of good stuff from that. Peyton is, again, on Twitter, at Peyton Skinner 12. You got to follow my guy here. He's all the time with some really knowledgeable stuff, posts about his articles, which will be coming more frequently as the season starts, I hope.
Absolutely.
Very good. And likewise, you can catch me at spstreamer.com. I write there. You can catch us here on the Next Pick podcast. I'm on Twitter right here at Drew is okay. I'm regularly talking about Creed and Seiya Suzuki. If you're interested in either or both of those things, they'll be there. So until next time, it's been great talking to you, Peyton. It's been great communicating with all of you. We thank you so much for the comments and for the camaraderie and for helping us to facilitate this discussion. Until next time, see you later.